know your none of the above neighbor. My name is Brian Burkhoff, and I'm the pastor at Holland UCC and part of the Interfaith Allies group that is hosting tonight's event. Interfaith Allies seeks to provide opportunities for learning, understanding, and cooperation among the diversity of religious and non-religious expressions in our area. This is our second Get to Know Your Neighbor event. Some of you perhaps were at our first one in November. We did a Know Your Muslim Neighbor event, and in April we were planning a Know Your Hindu Neighbor event, and we'll share some details about that later in the evening. I want to thank all of our sponsors for tonight, including the Lakeshore Ethnic Diversity Alliance, or LEDA, the Kaufman Interfaith Institute, Hope Church, First Presbyterian Church, and Holland United Church of Christ. Tonight we're not featuring a particular religious group. In fact, we're featuring a panel of folks who do not subscribe to any religious tradition. And this is a growing segment of the population in the U.S. And Pew Research suggests that it may be as high as 1/4 or even more of all Americans. This is not a monolithic group, however, as some identify as atheist, some as agnostic, some as humanists, some as all three of those, and others as spiritual but not religious, or perhaps just simply none or nothing. I'm excited about this event tonight because I think we have a lot to learn from people who have left institutional religion and traditional faith behind, or perhaps were never there at all. So who are these folks who check none or none of the above when they're filling out their survey or informational sheet? Well, in a few moments, we'll have a chance to meet a few.
And I am your other host or moderator. My name is Sarah Jor Van Oosterhout. I am the Executive Director and Managing Attorney at Lighthouse Immigrant Advocates. I see a lot of familiar faces in the audience tonight. Lighthouse is a nonprofit immigration law office and advocacy center here in Holland, for those of you that don't know. So attorneys are a lot of times the butt of heaven and hell jokes. I checked today just to be sure. It's the bad attorneys at least. And I make it probably no better by standing up here and announcing my membership in the none of the above group. That's why I was asked to speak here today. Although I'm hoping that for those of you who do know my work, maybe I do make that whole reputation a little better. So anyway, I am quite thrilled to be here tonight at this Know Your Rights. But Know Your Neighbor series. They've been great, especially from the perspective that I have on the issue of religion when I'm welcoming new people to our community from other countries who do bring new religions to the area. So these have been really fantastic to debunk some of those myths surrounding these new people that are coming to West Michigan. It's been an interesting and sometimes challenging experience living here in Holland, Michigan, as someone who professes to be agnostic, particularly as I'm working to get a new nonprofit up and running. I grew up in an evangelical home, so I do understand the religious speak that I hear so often, but it doesn't necessarily resonate with me. So I am particularly thrilled tonight that we get to hear directly from other folks, and like I said, debunk some of the myths surrounding our lack of religious affiliation. Like the last Know Your Rights neighbor. I'm going to have to really like a Know Your Neighbor event. How many were there before at the last one? Okay, so some people who are kind of familiar with the way this goes. You yourselves will have an opportunity to ask questions of our panelists, and you can do that in two ways. You can text it to the number on the screen here, or you can write your questions down on the card. And if you didn't get a card, did we already solve that issue, Jill? Or okay, why don't you just throw your hand up if you want a card? Otherwise, you can text to that number. And while they're doing that, I want to start to introduce our panelists. So first, we have Sydney Watson. Sydney is a junior at Grand Valley State University studying public and nonprofit administration, go you, as well as human rights. Sydney is the Interfaith intern at Grand Valley through the Kaufman Institute, and she's the coach for Interfaith Youth Core and is also the social media coordinator for Convergence, which is a newer interfaith nonprofit dealing with policy changes in higher education. You're a busy lady. 10. I'm gonna butcher your last name.
Oh,
there we go. All right. Everybody butchers my names. Tim graduated from Holland Christian and works as a buyer at West Michigan Office Furniture Company. He lives on the north side of Holland and enjoys spending time with his daughter. His interests include religion, history, politics. This is the right place for you. And his hobbies are board games, computers, and amateur magic. Tim is also active in the West Michigan Center for Inquiry. Next, we have Patricia Lynn Riley. She has been a lover of words and ideas since Catholic elementary school. A graduate of Princeton Seminary, her first set of books explored the insights of feminist theology with readers outside of academic circles. Patricia's daily mindfulness practice inspires her to stay present as she participates fully in life's gifts and challenges. Next, we have Chris Lubbers. We can clap for Chris teaches philosophy at Muskegon Community College and enjoys discussing philosophical, theological, and political issues at pub theology groups in Holland, Saugatuck, and Kalamazoo. He supports nonviolent organizations and movements working for peace, justice, equality, and mercy. And finally, we have Alice Jasper, who is the Associate Program Director for the Lakeshore Ethnic Diversity Alliance, one of our sponsors tonight. Alice is passionate about working with and learning from community leaders to advance social equity in the West Michigan region.
Welcome all. So great to have you collected here and great to have a good audience here on a snowy night. So thank you all for coming out. So first of all, we just want you to tell us who you are, things you like to do, what you do, hobbies, stuff you do for fun, things like that. So there's a mic up there and just pass it around.
Hi, everybody. I noticed that my face is hot. That means there's like a lot of feeling about being here. So that's a good thing.
Hold it nice and close.
Okay. I live in Holland. I live near the lake, which is my Midwest ocean. As a California girl, I couldn't move here unless we lived within 3 blocks of the Midwest ocean. I love the sound of the lake at night. It puts me to sleep. It's a lullaby. I love the trees on the lakeshore. I hike Riley Park along the beaches. I tell my partner all the time I'm so happy here, which I'm a Berkeley, Oakland girl, so that is a big deal. That's a very big deal. I spend my days with words. I love words. The nuns in elementary school taught me to love words, and I write personally and professionally every day in some way, shape, or form. I'm a member of Lakeshore Women for Peace, and some of them are here. I attend C3, which is an amazing Grand Haven community theater too, for folks like us who want a place to gather. And I'm on the Interfaith Allies Committee, and grateful to be working around a table with cool people here in Holland.
Good evening. My name is Alice Jasper. As I said, I work with Lakeshore Ethnic Diversity Alliance. I guess for those of you I haven't met before, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I was raised by an interracial couple there, and my mom was originally from the Michigan area, which prompted me to look into schools here. So for a minor culture shock, I then moved to the Upper Peninsula for school. But I loved it, and I really fell in love with my connection to nature up there. In 2012, I moved to Grand Rapids, where I live now, and I like to say that Grand Rapids is kind of my Goldilocks. It's my happy medium between what I love about Brooklyn, New York, and what I love about the Upper Peninsula. I like to go check out art, and I like the diversity there, and I like the music and those things, and I also enjoy taking my dog for hikes and getting outside and hanging out with my friends. So, thanks, guys.
Okay, I'm Tim Van Heidsma. Grew up in the Holland, New Zealand area from the start. Attended Christian school system throughout, and yet somehow or other ended up on this panel. I went to Catholic College for a semester, drifted around, ended up at University of Montana, back at Hope. Did a lot of different things. Work in the area, lived in the area now pretty much all my life. Raising my daughter, going to West Ottawa, and she's in 8th grade, and yeah, looking forward to this discussion. I've been in this game for a long time. I actually kind of gave up the religious game when I was in high school, actually. So I guess, you know, get your tuition's worth.
Hi, I'm Sydney Watson. I am a student at Grand Valley. I grew up in Grand Haven, so just a little north of here. So I love the beach. Yeah, big fan. I was adopted as a baby, so growing up that kind of brought a lot of family into my life. When I turned 18, I met all my family, so that's a lot of what I do for fun, is just hang out with them and my 4 little siblings. Yeah.
Hi. I'll start by saying I don't like talking about myself. Is that enough? So like Tim, I grew up, for the most part in this area. I was actually born in Mexico because my parents were missionaries there, and went to Holland Christian, went to Calvin College, and like Tim, somehow ended up on this panel. Also, like Tim, I enjoy discussing these kinds of things. I go to pub theology groups in West Michigan, helped start a few of them, and I like playing disc golf with Brian, especially. Good enough.
All right, so we know from Pew Research, the Pew Center for Research, that 1/5 of the U.S. public and 1/3 of adults under 30 are religiously unaffiliated today. As one of the religiously unaffiliated, how do you describe yourself and how would you define this identity?
I guess it's my turn since I'm still holding this. I think I would describe myself using all the terms that Brian mentioned earlier, including atheist, agnostic, humanist. I wouldn't necessarily say these are central to my identity. I think I probably wouldn't talk about them that much if this weren't such a religious community, and it comes up all the time. But I would sort of distinguish those terms as sort of the atheist position is I don't think there are any such things as gods, or it doesn't matter how many there are. But the agnostic position is I don't know whether there are any gods. So that's kind of an epistemic position. The humanist position is more of a moral outlook and perhaps also epistemic. It has to do with how we can come to know things and what should motivate us to live our lives together in a decent way.
All right. I would describe myself as an agnostic, and unlike you, I talk about it all the time. I love to talk about it. It's a huge part of my identity. I think that really is because I started out in school at Aquinas, not Catholic at all, and Interfaith really grew there, and that began my own discovery into my own faith. So for me, in all my work I do, I love talking about it. So I guess the values that hold me to my agnosticism, I would describe it as a build your own kind of faith for me personally.
Well, Chris stole a little bit of what I was going to say, but yeah, I agree with him completely. It's like, for me, I apply any of the terms pretty much fit. I'm an atheist as far as I don't believe in a God. I'm an agnostic as far as I don't know if there's a God. And belief and knowledge, I think, are two different things. And I would consider myself a secular humanist from a moral, ethical stance. I'm here to further getting along with and making a better world for all of us. Also a skeptic in the scientific sense of the word, as in I apply skepticism to all things I go towards and go, okay, what does the evidence say and where does this lead me towards? So any one of those terms is perfectly fine. There's probably half a dozen other ones that would probably work also.
So I guess if I had to put a name on it, I would be spiritual, but not religious. I was not raised in any religion. I'd never been to church other than to attend christenings or other events like weddings and things like that. So it's never really been a part of my life or upbringing. I do have some sense of spiritual drive or connection. I think it's going to sound really nerdy, but I think space is just the coolest thing ever, and I find it to be very humbling and a source of connection for me with kind of that universal concept of how big things are, and not to feel insignificant, but humbled by it. So I guess that's kind of where I'm at.
I was shopping around for a name at one point in my life because I was a Catholic for my early years and then a Protestant. Those were during the years when I had no choice. I was sort of tossed about by inherited faiths of my parents. And when I read the definition of humanism that you've seen flashed on the screen, and I'm just going to personalize it because when I read it, it fit. So if I have to name myself, it would be humanist, and I like the fact that human is in there. I sort of had a trouble with atheist because it was not something, and I didn't want to be not something. I didn't want to be not something. I wanted to be positive in my viewpoint, and so humanist. I affirm that human beings have the right and responsibility to give meaning and shape to their lives. I stand for the building of a more humane society through an ethics based on human values in a spirit of reason and free inquiry through human capacities. That fit for me, so I appreciate that there are a variety of names to choose from. Most poetically, I would call myself a child of life.
Just want to remind everyone that you can get your question in if you text Interfaith, that's Inter, I-N-T-E-R-F-A-I-T-H, 546-237-607. Then you can text us your question. So it's kind of a two-step process for the texting. There's a space in between Interfaith and 546. There's no cell reception, so, okay. We also have, some of you are familiar with these things, pens and a little piece of paper. And we have ushers in the middle, so if you want to just pass them all up to the middle when you have one ready, or raise your hand, somebody will come grab it. Perfect. All right. For you all, what were the major experiences and influences that shaped your perspective and identity? Some of you have hinted at being raised in a religious environment, some of you not. What influence did that have? And what else came into play that helped shape your path as it has evolved?
So My religious history is complicated. When I was in elementary school, I was taken away from my alcoholic parent and placed in a children's shelter and then a Catholic orphanage. So I was raised during elementary school in a self-contained Catholic community. I will always be grateful for the kindness and education that the nuns gave me. Always. They taught me to love words. They gave me a free space for my mind to develop out of the dysfunction of an alcoholic home. However, I was taught by the nuns that the Protestants were going to hell. Now, I didn't have any Protestant friends. In my little world, they were all Catholics. So that statement they made didn't really touch me personally because I thought everybody was Catholic. You know, there were 200 kids in the orphanage. We were all Catholic. We went to Mass. So it really didn't touch me in a personal way. However, my mother got sober and retrieved me on my 8th grade graduation, which she had vowed to do, and she did it. And she had started life over again in a Protestant church in Newark, New Jersey. So we were tossed from the self-contained Catholic community where the Protestants were going to hell to a conservative Protestant community where, guess what? The Catholics were going to hell. Now this really outraged me, and in daily vacation Bible school, which I'd never heard of before, but it was in a garage, and the minister had us all there during the summer between my graduation and start of high school, and I argued with him, and I said, oh no, my grandmother loved Jesus, and she goes to Mass every day, and she receives Jesus into her being. You're not going to tell me that my grandmother is going to hell. And he said, oh yes, she didn't say the right prayer, and she's going to hell. At the end of that summer, my grandmother died, and I went to her funeral, and I was inconsolable, because what was raging inside of me were the words of both those religious communities about someone who I loved more than I've loved anyone in my life. My grandmother was the only anchor during those crazy years. And I believe, to shut it down, that at that funeral, I took the first step on a 2-decade journey to letting go of religion and God.
Thank you for sharing. I guess there were a couple of seeds for me. When I was in the 3rd grade, my parents enrolled me in a Friends school, which is a Quaker school. And a lot of those values of equality and stewardship and kind of community togetherness, silent reflection, which sounds kind of cool now, but when you're 7 and you have to sit silent, not as much. And just that kind of value and that core value, which is to find the God within or the light within, and it doesn't necessarily have to connect to a religion, but everybody has this capacity and this potential, and the curriculums and the education in that school were very focusing on each child individually and how to bring out that potential in their own learning way, the way that they focused in learning. So I think that was a big seed. And then when I was probably about 10 or 11, my father decided that he was really moved by Tibetan Buddhism, and to this day does pro bono work for them. He's 84 and still working at the Tibet House in New York. And I think that a lot of those values, as well as kind of the empowerment of finding that oneness and that light within, that connectedness and just kind of striving towards wisdom and community, I think have kind of laid the foundation for where I'm at today.
Boy, I'm sure I follow this. Born and raised in the area. I mentioned in the bio and otherwise, I went through the Holland Christian school system. Raised very strictly Christian Reformed in the area from like 1970s, 1980s, coming of age. My parents always valued knowledge a lot, though. I'll give them a lot of credit for that. They actually encouraged questioning to a certain degree, sort of my schooling and everything else, but I probably took that a little farther than most of them were comfortable with. Especially, as middle school years were running around and then high school confirmation classes, which I never did. I did the classes, I never did the confirmation because I kept having more questions going, this is a contract, I'm taking it seriously, which I think is what you're after. Okay, I have more questions before I sign the form of subscription to say, I believe this. It's like, so it never happened. There are a few different instances. Probably one of the big ones I remember was Old Testament class in Holland Christian, where I asked the theodicy question of God knows everything. Yes, he does. God, ordains what happens. Yes, he does. So he knew, therefore, that humans would sin and fall into, the fall. Yes, so therefore it's really God's fault. And the only answer they had was my teacher, Mr. Wolcott, who was a very good teacher, by the way, but all he did was step back and go, I'm not even going to answer that because I'm afraid he might be struck by lightning in school. So, that was one of those things where I was like, okay, we need to think more about this. But that kept happening, and again, by the time I graduated from high school, I had wound down pretty much from that entire thing. Hardest moment I ever had was taking my dad out for breakfast at Russ's in Holland and telling him, I don't believe what you believe. It's kind of a coming out of the closet moment, especially in this community at that time. But things are good. So, all right, I guess that's it.
So I grew up in a Presbyterian household in Grand Haven, which is very similar to Holland religious-wise, very CRC, RCA. And when I was very involved, super involved. My dad was a deacon on a lot of committees. But when I was 15, a youth group pastor that I was really close to was accused and convicted of sexual assault, dealing with a bunch of girls that I had known and were friends with. So that was the first time that I really questioned, how could this happen in my church? I've been, this man is a mentor to me. I've gone on mission trips with him. So that's when I really kind of stepped away. That was the beginning of high school. And through the rest of high school, I didn't go to church with my dad. We talked about it a little bit, but I was mostly pushed it away. At Aquinas, that's when religion really opened up to me. I was very confused because I was not sure what I was. And at Aquinas, you pretty much have to talk about religion. It's a must. So dealing with a bunch of other people who were also in the same boat as me, Catholics, Christians, agnostics, atheists, humanists, was incredibly helpful in helping me to develop my own personal identity. So I think really growing up and being able to talk to different people has helped me to shape my own personal identity.
Like Tim, I also grew up in this area, in the CRC, grassroots CRC, maybe one of the more conservative ones, even for this area. And I would say, I'm not sure I can trace my whole path, of course. I'm sure there were influences I'm not aware of, but I've always been intellectually curious. And that, maybe studying philosophy has developed that a bit more, but I it's not something I take credit for. It's kind of a curse, you know. I'm like the perpetual 2-year-old, always asking, well, why? Why is that true? And why is that true? And so on. My students love it. But I think part of the reason I became an atheist is because of that, because I took my religion so seriously, because I really wanted to understand it and make sense of it. And after trying and trying, I just couldn't. And eventually I realized I just don't believe this stuff anymore. And I can remember second grade, Sunday school, teacher was asking a very difficult question, where is God? And of course everyone knew the answer, God is up in heaven. And it just struck me, wait a second, what about people in China? You know, that's the other side of the world. When they point up, they're pointing in exactly the opposite direction. Now, of course, there are perfectly good Christian answers to that. She could have said, well, God is everywhere, so no matter where you're pointing, God is there, right? But that wasn't the response I got. The response I got was essentially, don't be a smartass, you know? She probably said smarty pants, in fairness. And I just thought that was strange, you know? And that's when I first started to realize this is a place that doesn't welcome those kinds of questions. The kinds of questions that I'm constantly asking myself, you know? Unfortunate, I think. I'm glad to see that I actually attend a church now. I'm glad to see that there are churches now that do encourage asking questions. So I attend Brian's church at Holland UCC, with a plug for him.
Do we have any questions? We had,
Nothing on the screen?
yeah, our technology is not doing its job. We're going to move on to question D while we wait for them to, or maybe Jill's going to come now with it. Oh.
We wondered, we thought, why?
Oh no. Okay, yeah, let's do D. Question D. So we live in a challenging time. I think this is an understatement after the week I've had. What is your source of hope for humankind? What motivates you to live out your values? What drives you to do what you do? What's your source of inspiration for your values? Yeah.
All right, source of hope. I'm not sure hope is always warranted, but I think there are things about which we can be hopeful. I think, contrary to what I was taught growing up, I don't think people are totally depraved and incapable of doing good unless God works through them. I think people are basically good, and the more we learn about each other, the better we can be to each other. I think the internet has facilitated a lot of eye-opening, and I think that just causes people to be more compassionate toward people that they otherwise would dismiss or start wars against or what have you. What motivates me to do the work I do? I guess I want to encourage in my work critical thinking more than anything else. Most of my students will never take another philosophy class, let alone become philosophers. But I think it's important for everyone to think and take seriously, think critically about the most fundamental beliefs that we have, whether that's in religion or politics or in ethics. I think that's really the only way to make progress, and a lot of what holds us back, I think, from making progress is living in insular communities where everybody constantly agrees with us. When everybody agrees with you, you never have to think, hey, is that really true? So I would encourage that sort of thing when I work. As far as morality, I think it's pretty clear to anyone who's lived long enough that suffering is a bad thing. And I don't think you really need God to figure that out. And after a while, you realize suffering is bad no matter who or what it happens to. So that alone can be a strong enough basis, I think, for a good moral theory.
For me, I find hope the most in the people surrounding me. Not only the people surrounding me, but the people nationally, worldwide. I believe that humans are innately good. We're born to do good things. And just being able to see that and see the deeds that people are doing just because they want to and they think they're helping others is what inspires me as well to continue to live by my morals, by my values, to also do good things. So I think that with all the good things people are doing, it's just hopeful for a better world.
Well, it's probably going to be a very bad paraphrase of, I believe it was Martin Luther King Jr. The long arc of human history tends towards goodness. I don't think that's intrinsically so, but I think it is so as we've experienced it. I find hope in the fact that the world now is better than any world that has ever existed for any of our ancestors at any time. We live longer. We're more prosperous worldwide. We live longer. We're more prosperous. We have better access to material resources and to each other. And I think that will hopefully continue to build no matter what temporary setbacks that may be in different places at different times. But I take hope in the fact that humanity is better the longer we've been here. We are not falling and getting worse. We are getting better every year. And I think it's demonstrably true. So that is where I derive my hope from. And that's what I work towards. Again, echoing probably Chris too much, critical thinking, the ability to evaluate things that are in front of you and think and relate to everyone that's around you in the most effective way you can, and to foster that amongst each other is probably the thing that gives me more hope in my future. That's how I raise my daughter. That's how I try to communicate with those around me as ineffectively as I may do it. So that's, I guess, the basics of my hope and my morals and where I'm going in my life. So that's it.
And I'll keep my response brief because I think it would just be echoing what my panelists said. I think that I have hope for very similar reasons, and I don't. I know a lot of people. Most of the people that I'm close to are not religious in any way. Some don't have any spiritual beliefs at all. But I know some pretty incredible people. I think, and I don't think that any particular religion or spiritual leaning has to be present for there to be hope and some reassurance that there is good in humanity and that we are making strides to be better. So.
I've been very hopeful for Holland, so I just want to say you are a source of my hope. I never thought I'd actually say that. But the fact that you're here tonight and you're willing to acknowledge that people like us exist in this community. Years ago, I wrote a book called A God Who Looks Like Me when I was sorting through the male God. Had trouble with that along the way. And the radio show guy came to the book event I did and he said, "We have a package for Patricia and we don't know if it's a bomb or not." Now, that was a while ago. So if you question the gender of God, you riled up the whole community. So tonight you're sitting here listening to those who are religiously unaffiliated, and I doubt that there'll be any bomb threats. Although one of my atheist colleagues who spoke at the Humanist conference a few years ago was one of the atheist bloggers in Indonesia that was killed. So our lives are threatened in parts of the world if we don't believe in the one true God. But you give me hope. Lakeshore Women for Peace gives me hope. Every year they honor International Peace Day. So the marchers, there were 350 to 400 marchers here in Holland on Saturday, over 700 marchers in Saugatuck on Sunday. That gives me hope. So I'm learning to bloom where I'm planted and look for sources of hope on the local level, because if I go too far beyond that, I tend to, my hope gets a little shaky, but locally I am hopeful. So you are a source of hope for me.
Question from the audience, and maybe this segues as to what you were saying there, Patricia. Have you experienced any discrimination in the Holland or West Michigan area due to your beliefs or lack of beliefs, or what is it like for you generally to be in this area?
Just quickly, it's uncomfortable on a professional level to work in the sort of secular, non-faith-based community and find that there really is no secular space from which social services are offered, because Christianity and a certain version of Christianity is so in the DNA of this culture that to be an out non-Christian is uncomfortable. I am more bold, so when I worked in that segment of the community, I was an out non-Christian. And I questioned why we had a Christian minister say a prayer at a volunteer banquet when we have people of all different stripes who volunteer for our agency. Why were the case managers being encouraged to pray with clients, which set all of us up to have to be in an uncomfortable position when we don't pray? I mean, it's more reasonable to say, hey, what are your spiritual resources? I support you to connect with them and find the prayer and support you need. That's perfectly okay. But for a secular organization and its case managers to pray with clients is, to me, violating a secular space where all people are welcome and there are no faith-based gatekeepers to offering support.
So I don't experience, I don't have a lot of people, like I said, that are close to me that are affiliated with religion, any religion. So the conversation doesn't come up very much, to be honest. And I even found it curious that there was a space for the conversation. And being here, I think that Holland is a little bit different than Grand Rapids in that way. But so the first time I was in a meeting with the Interfaith Allies Steering Committee, that some people in the meeting were kind of listing off some of the churches in the area, and I don't know the difference between any of the churches. I kind of related it to if somebody who'd never been to New York City came and I said, okay, you're going to take the F train to J Street, Borough Hall, and you take the 1 to uptown, like, you know I'm talking about public transportation, but that's kind of it. That's my understanding of it, and I have the same understanding of other religions as well. It's curiosity and it's openness, but it's not an in-depth knowledge. So this isn't my culture in that way, and so kind of navigating that and the language and some of the expectations that might be there are new to me because I'm not from here. So yeah, I guess that's kind of my experience.
I mean, I haven't probably, I don't think I have professionally hit any roadblocks because of my unbelief, which I am fairly open with. I mean, with people that I know, I have no qualms saying anything about it. It's not something I advertise by wearing t-shirts necessarily unless I'm on my own time somewhere. But with family and, you know, probably old family friends a bit in the area as far as just presuppositions about, oh, you know, what's going on, especially when I was younger. I think Holland has changed a lot in the last 15, 20 years, very, very much so. Very seldom do I hear anymore is the first question of, oh, hi Tim, what church do you go to? 20 years ago, that was almost everyone's first question when they first met you, and they made all their judgments based on how you answered that one question. But that doesn't really happen anymore, especially among people under 30, you know, that doesn't happen. And it doesn't really happen much to me. So I would say I probably haven't had that much discrimination in the area, even though I'm fairly out with what I do. I understand the culture, that probably helps a lot. You know, I can talk the talk as good as any Calvinist. I got the education, and you know, and I don't mean that, by the way, in a horribly belittling way. I mean that I understand the way they think. I'm able to relate to them on a personable level, and to be able to communicate effectively with them from where they are. So that is a big advantage, you know, when dealing with the larger community, especially from people from that perspective. So, like I said, I haven't experienced a whole lot of it. I've heard stories. And I think Holland's getting better. So, take away.
I definitely think family is the hardest. Not necessarily discrimination, but a lot of questions and whys and like eyes, like the weird eyes, like, oh, can't talk to you. But where I face the most problems are probably on campus when I am discussing interfaith work. I get a lot of, the first question a lot of the times is, oh, interfaith, so what church do you go to? I do get that. And then after that, explaining what interfaith is and what I do and how I don't believe in God, that's when it gets more and more standoffish, I've found. So that's my personal goal right now, is creating a more welcoming space on campus for that. But as for discrimination, I wouldn't say there's much right now for me personally.
I think Holland is a very polite place. So I think the kind of discrimination atheists or agnostics might feel in other places just isn't expressed, but it is thought, certainly, right? So I would say that the issue is not so much that people do bad things to you because you're an atheist. I think it's more a matter of Christian privilege, akin to like white privilege or male privilege. It's just assume that Christianity is the norm, and anybody who isn't like that is talking too much about the fact that they aren't like that, and drawing too much attention to themselves, or arguing with us, or really is a bad person and is trying to destroy the church, and stuff like that. So I think it's more that Christianity is just assumed, and I'll repeat some of the things that were said earlier. I mean, I don't know if I've gone to any organizational meeting of any group in Holland that didn't start with a prayer. Might want to think about whether that's welcoming to everybody.
So we're going to do a little bit of a lightning round with some of these audience questions. We don't expect all of you to answer these. I might point to a couple of you and target you, single you out. No offense. So to start with. So we're going to combine a couple of these questions because they just make sense. So, choose.
I'm still in the mic, so.
Yeah, okay, Chris, we'll start with you. So question, or part one of this question, do you believe there is something beyond death? And then part two, how do you respond to someone who says, I'm worried that you're going to hell? So Chris, you start, and then we'll pass it to Alice, I guess. I don't know, sorry.
Good questions. Do I think there's something beyond death? Not for me. I mean, I think once I'm dead, there won't be any more experiences that I'll be aware of. Right? So I think that is the end of human existence when a person dies. A lot of people think that sounds terrible, but it's worth thinking about whether living forever would be a good thing. It sounds like you could end up with eternal boredom, right? I've done that already a million times. Going to hell, well, I would say, certainly not something I worry about, because I don't think there is any such thing as hell or heaven or anything like that. And there are a lot of Christians also who don't think that hell exists, and a lot of Christians who don't think there's any kind of afterlife. I know a Bible teacher, for example, who has that position, but probably wouldn't say so in class.
So I remember you mentioned this, and I certainly am a fan of Carl Sagan, and is it the tiny blue dot, right? There's so much that we don't know, and to me it's kind of just one big beautiful question mark, and I'm okay with that. I don't claim to have any information on what's supposed to happen. It could be nothing. It could be like in epic space travel. That would be my preferred outcome. But I think that I'm very, 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 very small, and there's so much I don't know. So I don't feel like I'm in any position to answer any sort of afterlife question. And I think that if somebody was worried I was going to hell, I guess I would be concerned that they were judging me or feeling like I deserved to be damned or punished because I don't think like them, or I don't necessarily look through the same world lens as them. So, yeah.
All right, for Patricia and Sydney, don't worry, Tim, we'll get you in a second. What do you believe is the purpose of life? Easy one.
Wow. Well, one thing I really appreciate about my years in Catholicism and in the church is that the people I was around lived with a very deep sense of purposefulness. So I was shaped around purposeful communities. And although I left the content and context of that purposefulness, I believe it was a gift they gave me because I've always lived a purposeful life. And what comes to me right now are the fire ants of the Amazon. These are those red little ants that when there's a flood in the Amazon, they link legs and they become a living raft for the queen and her babies. So Google fire ants plus Amazon and you'll see photographs of these living rafts that protect the queen and her babies until the floods subside. And then they go onshore. They disconnect as a raft, and the queen and the babies sustain life. That is the source of my purposeful life. I believe we are called, all of us, and hardwired, just as the fire ants are, to link legs, to become a living raft for each other. And the work that Sarah's doing, her organization is a living raft. for the immigrants in our community. And that's the purposefulness of my life. And I believe I'm linking legs with Christians in that purpose, and atheists, and every human being, because I don't believe there's any God who's going to do it for us. We link legs, and we become living rafts for each other.
There's no way mine will be as eloquent as that. Wow. So, I think that my personal purpose is to leave the world better than I came into it. I think that could look different for each individual. I think we all have different interests, different beliefs, different things that inspire us. So for me personally, I would say part of my identity is loving the environment. So in order to fulfill my purpose, I don't eat meat, try not to use plastic. I am using a plastic water bottle. I don't use straws, so just little things like that, I think, really help to fulfill purposes based on different beliefs.
All right, so this question, we're going back to Chris and we're going to Sydney. And I am so sorry for this one. Someone in this audience has it out for you. So it seems we can agree that evil and hatred exist in the world. If we are innately good, how would you explain the presence of evil? Or what term would you use for evil? Again, I'm sorry.
So, what was the idea? What is the origin of evil if we're innately good?
If we're innately good, how would you explain the presence of evil?
Yeah. Well, so to say that we're innately good is to say that that's the natural disposition, but it doesn't mean that we don't do things that are wrong. I would say the main reason people are innately good is because if we weren't, we would not have survived as a species. It's necessary for us to work together to survive. And I think that's why we have that instinct and why we have things like empathy and so on. But, a long time ago, we were very tribal, and we still are. And I would say that along with the idea that we need to get along to survive was the idea that we need to fight off our enemies, right? And so I think as communities grow and join together, it's hard to negotiate that sort of tribalism. You want to say, I'm inclined to say we want to make everybody part of the same tribe and get rid of this idea that some people are our enemies.
Yes.
All right, Tim. Oh, she's passing.
Well, like Chris said, I want to echo basically everything he said. Probably the one thing I would stress that you didn't, probably because you didn't think of it, or whatever, is there's also a certain level of social deviancy. Everything is a bell curve. People are also, so you have people that are on either end of what is considered normal, innate good behavior. I guess it's trite and a bad way to put it, but there's such thing as bad seed. There are people that are broken internally that, exhibit wrong behavior and what would be called evilness. So, you always have the outliers that you need to work on in society to reform or at least mitigate their consequences on society. That's probably the only thing I'd add to what you said. So.
Great. We'll just hang on to that mic, Tim. We'll stick with you. We'll give you a 2-for-1 here just to get you up to speed. Why don't we have an annual festival or holiday or even just a picnic for those of us who are nuns? It's every day. It's every day. It's a lightning round, right? There we go. All right, I'm going to move over to Alice. This question says, most religions have rules, laws, or mantras. Where do you find your guidance or structure? What guides your life?
Empathy. I have empathy, and I do what I think is best, which I think is pretty much what everybody tries to do. And there are certainly people who have religion who deviate from those rules or mantras. So I think it kind of all connects into what all the other panelists have been saying, as far as there is an innate good that guides us, and I think that guided probably a lot of the creation for rules that we have to function and be good people. I feel like that's kind of vague, but empathy. So yeah.
Patricia,
Yeah.
how do you deal with know-it-all religious people?
Well, earlier in my life, I took them on, and I wrote those books. But I have a lot of compassion for them, actually. I mean, I'm in a place in my life where I feel very confident and settled and at peace with the choices that I've made, the path that I've traveled, the communities that I hang out with. So there isn't that fiery energy of individuation, which initially, when you break from a community, sometimes it's a harsh sort of pushing away in order to find your own identity. So I actually have a lot of compassion for Christians. I don't pray for them, but I hold them in my heart. I am grateful to meet versions of Christians who are inclusive and who hold the whole human community in their heart with acceptance and respect. So I feel compassion.
Sydney, do you follow any sort of spiritual or meditation practice?
No.
There it is. All right. All right. Now we're going to move to a more true lightning round question, which anyone could answer. What do you love to binge watch or read? Is there a series on Netflix or Hulu, or favorite movie, book, show, whatever? And maybe all of you could answer this one quickly.
I can mention several, but right now I'm watching The Path on Hulu, which relates to the discussion we're having. I highly recommend it. Kind of a look at a nascent religion, a lot of parallels to early Christianity, both looking at it from the inside and from the point of view of skeptics and outsiders and so on. And a great show in general.
I'm watching Dexter, which has nothing to do with anything, but I love it.
I binge watch too much, but I'm going to throw back to a movie for this. I'm going to go Name of the Rose, old movie with Sean Connery. Probably, it's very germane, I think, to this discussion. If you've never seen it, give it a chance, or read the excellent book by Umberto Eco.
I am in the next generation camp of Star Trek. And I'll watch that show over and over and over again forever. And I really like Firefly. I think that show is great. And I'm currently reading A People's History of the United States.
Wow. Well, I don't have a television. That's part of the purposefulness that I got from the Christian. As probably why I always say that's why I've written so many books, because I didn't have a television, but I do have a computer. That's a whole other story. But what I'll say is my favorite movie today is Lady Bird. I loved it. How many of you saw it? Oh, it's such a cool movie, and Greta Gerwig did a fantastic job, and we're all hoping she gets an Oscar. First woman, so that would be great. And I'm reading Women Without Superstition. So it's a powerful book about our foremothers, those of you in the audience who identify in the same way as we do up here, and you want to be encouraged that you even weren't alone if you lived a century ago. Read Women Without Superstition.
Favorite place to travel or dream vacation?
Ireland. I love Ireland.
I like to go home to Brooklyn or somewhere that is warm with a large body of water.
You're going to hate me, but anywhere but New York City.
It's really cliche. I'd like to go to Sydney.
Last summer, I drove across the country to visit my brother in Washington, and got to see some of the national parks. I would say Glacier National Park was amazing, and I would love to go there again, just hike and camp and so on.
All right, I'm going to give you a 2-for-1, and these are not related. Do you prefer beer or wine? And are you a night owl or a morning person?
I prefer beer now. I used to be a wine person, but there's so much good beer now. And I'm not a morning person at all. Night owl.
You're a skeptic that morning exists.
Definitely beer. Morning person for sure.
Definitely beer. And I used to be a night person, and I'm regrettably becoming a morning person, much to my personal shame.
I live in Grand Rapids, so I think I'm required to say beer. Also, my good friend Laurel's here, and she works for Vermont, so I think she'd get mad at me if I said wine. And I like to sleep a lot, so I'm a late morning, late afternoon person. And night and morning are for sleep time.
So, in this alcohol-centric question, and given the purposefulness that I inherited from the beloved nuns and Christians, I don't drink alcohol. I'm perfectly happy without it. I call it, I live a natural high, so even socially, I don't need it to lubricate my capacities. And I also come from a line of Irish Catholic alcoholics, so let's get real. I cut my losses early and decided I would not even go there. And what was the other one? Oh, I'm a morning person. I write in the morning. It's just quiet and poetic and the perfect time to write.
I was trying to think of a terrible joke where you were out to dinner with some of the nuns, and you could say, well, I'm with a nun, I am a nun, and no thank you, I'll have none. I'll just hand the mic off right now.
There is a group, the nuns, and the nuns, just so you know, the NONESs have fallen in love with the social justice-oriented NUNSs, and Kaufman has been supporting that movement, so actually they found each other, which is a really interesting pairing. So.
Patricia, there's a question specifically for you. Does non-belief mean all experiences are interpreted rationally? And then this person wants you to speak to mystical experience that remains out of the reach of language.
Wow, wow, that's intense.
I know.
The way that I can find my way into that question is my mind was nurtured very early, for which I'm grateful. So my primary relationship to the world, as several others on this panel, was through thinking. Thinking helped me control very uncontrollable childhood, and thinking helped me to dismantle Christianity and God from within my internal infrastructure, which took a lot of work. So I craved at a certain point to live from another center. That was a very protective center, and obviously it's still very active, but I so wanted to be able to live from my heart and my intuition. And it became a practice to heal the heart and open my heart when it had been so broken. And that process led me to other realms of experience that only come with an open heart, and also learning to trust intuition, synchronicity, and those things that can't be formularized by the mind. That's the best I can do. So whoever you are, we could talk. Hi, we could get together afterward and talk some more.
So, Alice, and maybe if anyone else wants to answer, you can answer the mic. This person asks or says, I depend so much on prayer for myself and others. What do you do instead of prayer?
I talk to something. I mean, I believe that there's a connectedness, right? So I'm not, I don't believe necessarily in the absence of God. I believe that everything is connected, and I guess I would maybe define that as my God. So I'll kind of ask out loud for the ability to handle what comes my way with grace and courage and compassion. But I don't necessarily have a clearly defined, I guess, image of God or what I think that, it, he, she, they look like necessarily. So I speak to myself or the ether.
I help people. I reach out on social media, or I give them a call, or I do what I can. I don't personally believe there's anybody out there listening and talking to myself isn't going to change anything. So I try to get out there and do something if I can. And I don't always do it. I'm not the best person, but that's what I do.
Tattoos. Do you have them? And can you tell us what they are?
No.
I have 5. I have a rhino, mind over matter on the back of my neck, a wave on my ankle, a tree on my arm, and the word human on my ribs.
Nope. Don't like suffering.
I have a tattoo of an elephant on my foot.
Back when tattoos would have been appropriate, I'm of another age, so I didn't get one. But I will say something about prayer. Because I was so shaped by religious communities, and some of you may have found this yourself, that when I began to construct what I believed, I had to reverse or decompose the things that had meant so much to me in my early years. I said the Hail Mary on the rosaries, over and over again as a little girl. I knew the Our Father. I felt like prayer was a reaching out to the universe for support. So I reframed prayer and meditation. And I feel like for me, every breath is a prayer of gratitude for life itself. So for me, I had to take those categories that I grew up with and reshape them and reframe them in such a way that they worked.
So our last question is, what message or thought would you like to send to the audience this evening? What's your hope for them, or hope that maybe they got from this, or how can they support you?
Thanks for coming. Do more things like this. One of the things I encourage my students to do is go out of your way to talk to or read people who have opinions that are totally different from yours on important issues. Because there are always people who are smarter than you that disagree with you. Talk to them.
I really think educating yourself is the most important thing. These panels, like you said, reading, asking questions.
Yes, I would also say, I mean, this panel is a great thing. I'm feeling a certain degree. This is probably 80% preaching to the choir to a certain degree. Again, may not believe completely all the things or don't believe the same things that the people on the panel do, but you know, everybody out there, even if you're not part of the position, you know somebody who's an atheist or agnostic. They're your family, they're your coworkers, they sit in the pew next to you. Some of them are even in the pulpit, you don't know about it. They're out there, they're coming. The demographic wave is switching, so learning more about it, being more accepting, and realizing we only eat babies on high holidays is really important. But you know, I really appreciate everybody coming out for this. Another great group that I'm involved with, I haven't mentioned yet, is Center for Inquiry out of Grand Rapids. It's an international organization, but they do a great job. So anybody that is looking to reach out to a more secular community or have questions, great resource. We host the Skeptics in the Pub that we actually do on Tuesday nights. This Tuesday night, actually, after this. But there's events in Grand Rapids, and check them out if you're interested. So that's my one plug. You know, if you don't want to go to the UCC church, which Brian does, which is awesome.
I think that creating more spaces like this is really important, especially in communities that are where the majority of people have faith and have community in church. Creating communities where you might share values outside of religion, like equity. So I'll do my own plug since that's what we're doing. So allies, for example, so the Interfaith allies, or the women's group, women's allies, LGBTQ, like those spaces in shared values. It's those can create communities in themselves, and I think that that's really valuable if you don't necessarily feel like you can attach yourself to a religious community. So.
And this demographic is growing, and my compatriots have children and grandchildren, and so on behalf of them, I ask that you get involved in some way supporting the wall between church and state. And I have two suggestions. One is Americans for the Separation of Church and State, an amazing organization that works nationally to strengthen that wall. That's a good wall. And also the American Humanist Association has a legal center, and they're the ones who go and sue school boards because parents report that their children are required to pray because a certain Christian teacher sort of puts that kind of pressure on them. Pledge of Allegiance under God, which is challenging for those of us who, don't pledge allegiance to one nation under God. That doesn't work for us. So there are some things you can do on the national level, and then locally creating secular spaces, which we're responsible to do as well, to provide social services so that folks have access to them for their belief system, and there's no pressure on them to become a Christian or anything else in order to receive support from the community.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you. I want to take a moment and highlight a couple of Interfaith Allies' upcoming events. We have an Interfaith Community Dinner happening March 13. That's a Tuesday, 6 p.m. at the Holland Area Arts Council. And as mentioned earlier, our Know Your Neighbors series continues in April with Know Your Hindu Neighbor, and that's April 25, location still to be determined. And I'd like to thank all of my Interfaith Allies, steering committee friends who have worked so hard to make tonight happen. Thank you to Sarah for co-hosting. And let's give it up for our panelists one more time. We've got a little something from Kilwins for each of you and for Sarah, and so we're just grateful for you. They'll probably be around milling about, so if you have more questions, come and ask. And is there one last announcement?
Yeah, one more slide for you to show.
There's one more slide. A Grand Rapids event. Yes, thank you. There is an event coming up, or a film actually, called Jerusalem, which presents 3 vantage points, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim, through which the holy city of Jerusalem can be understood and experienced. That's Wednesday, February 7, Monday, February 12, both happening at Celebration Cinema, Grand Rapids North. And so that's another upcoming interfaith learning opportunity. Thank you all so much for coming. Travel safely home.
Really interesting. She did it.